Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Inner Frustum. We are here at Sony DMPC Pinewood, and we are very much looking forward to having a nice, good chat with you.
And I'm here with our special guest,
Yeah.
Ben Saffer and Simon Rowling, who are both DPs working in the industry.
Yes.
We're going to talk a little bit about virtual production, cinematography, and all cool things.
What's your favorite thing about virtual production for lighting and camera?
That's really deep, Hannah. Yeah. That's a deep start.
Holistic.
I'm interested in what got you started in VP as a cinematographer.
Do you want me to start with that?
Yeah.
You
start with that one.
So I think I came in I started off doing previs stuff with 3D programs a long time ago. So with like Cinema 4D, probably back in about 2016, to do previs on projects. And then when Unreal Engine became like a thing, started playing around with that. And then through that kind of found that was being used for virtual production. So got interested in VP that way. And then actually the first time I saw virtual production was a Final Pixel Academy workshop in Guildford.
Oh.
A couple of years ago now.
Yeah, a couple of years ago.
Yeah, a couple of years ago now. Yeah, so just after COVID, obviously heard about The Mandalorian, heard about some other shows that were using it. Had previously done things like rear projection for plates for car work, done quite a bit of that. But yeah, in terms of Unreal Engine 3D sort of based virtual production, that was the first time I'd seen it.
Amazing. What about you, Simon?
Yeah, I was just intrigued by it all when I started seeing it used in TV shows, and I was just like, this is obviously the future of how we're going to do things. And I come from a visual effects and special effects background, and I was like, I don't like using green screen. And I was like, this is so much more intuitive and easier as a cinematographer in a way, because you've got something to go off and it will give you something back, give you light source and etc. back. So yeah, I just started playing around with it, and I've used it on a couple of shoots since. So yeah, it's exciting.
So you were asking about lighting. So talking about LED panels and versus green screen, like what makes VP with panels with LED panels and lighting so much different than traditional?
You're not getting that bounce, that horrible green bounce that you then in post you have to pull the green out of the actor's face because they've got all this green or blue casting on them. And then you're like, well, I want to keep some of that green, but you can't because it's too much of it.
Right.
So it was obviously you don't have any of that with the LED walls. So and also you're getting the natural light that you would in an environment, aren't you?
Just for me, it's exactly what you said in terms of what's VP good for versus green screen. Because I think that's the thing is like, if I could be on location, I'd probably rather be on location if that's like feasible. But if it's going to be green screen or VP, I'd almost always rather be VP. Not always, but most of the time rather be VP, because you can actually light to a final image. You're actually lighting to what it's going to look like, rather than trying to guess at what it's all going to look like when it's come together. And for a long time we've been doing things like sort of slap comps on set, or like mix and overlay on Q-Take or whatever to kind of see some sort of approximation. But with VP, you're just capturing it all in camera. And I also think there's something about like you're capturing the whole image with like the same optics and the same sensor. And there's something that if you can capture an image that's like where everything's fairly well calibrated to each other in terms of the wall to the camera and all that, then there's a better consistency actually than doing it in post.
It's the old saying of get it in camera and it will save you down the line, because everyone was starting to go towards post is a lot more post heavy, and post was getting bigger and bigger budgets, etc. But if you start, because I came from practical special effects in camera stuff, and then I got into cinematography, and I was like, oh, and then now it's all going, and and I kind of got out of it, and I was just going into green rooms all the time, and I was like, it's got to be better than this.
Yeah, I think we've both done shows with like fully green screen, like, with literally no background, just green screen everywhere, and it is really hard to know what you're like. I found I did a couple of shows that were sort of
trust the post people as well.
Yeah, but also I feel like it's quite hard to be like bold with lighting in that situation, because you're sort of having to second guess what's going to be there. And I found I ended up kind of hedging my bets and going somewhere a little bit more safe when it came to lighting, because I didn't really know I only had a sort of a pre-visi kind of idea of what was going to be there. Whereas with VP, you can be quite bold with lighting, because you can tune it all in on set and know that the final image is sort of close to what you're going to get.
And is it your experience that production teams and the director is bringing you in earlier to inform on decision making with lighting within the Unreal environment?
That's ideal, and I think that's why I try to arm myself as much Unreal Engine skills as possible, because I want to be brought in into those conversations. It's not always the case, but that's definitely like the ideal, and that's when it's really like, that's when it all sort of flows as well. I think that's a good workflow, is if the DP is heavily involved in lighting the virtual world as well as the real set sort of thing, and then everything's really well kind of linked together.
It's also it's a much more inclusivity kind of way of doing it, rather than you shoot it on green screen or blue screen and then you can be just left in the dark. I've had that done to me, and I don't get a say on anything in terms of the visual effects, or
it's quite fun to collaborate.
I've lit it as though the moon's coming from there or the sun's coming from there, and then they change it in post, and you're like, well, that's not matching what I've done in camera. Whereas obviously if you shoot it there and then, it's got to match. And it's done then, isn't it?
And it's quite good fun collaborating with the VFX guys in a way that you wouldn't necessarily on a green screen shoot. I think it's quite a fun collaboration, because actually the guys who are really good at lighting and VFX, it's basically the same skill set that we have, just with different tools. But I quite like that. And some of them have got, because they don't have the physical constraints of having to rig the lights in a studio, they'll sometimes have quite interesting, quite bold ideas about lighting as well, which is quite good fun. So I really like working with the VFX sort of lighting people. It's quite an interesting skill set.
So if you describe your ideal schedule of when you would be brought in and the kind of conversations that you're having, not thinking about budget, just thinking about where would be great to be the DOP talking to the VAD team, to the overall production about how to do this well from your eyes.
It's not every VP shoot is able to do this, but I think if there's sort of previs involved, I think just getting involved at that point, some of the new workflows now where you're sort of building previs in Unreal Engine, and then those assets can flow down to the final VP shoot, which is really good. And we've been doing stuff with World Builder where we're able to sort of do that, which is really good. That's ideal, because if you're involved in the previs, you can start to think about the lighting, start to think about the camera positions and shots and that sort of thing, and then that's all flowing in. It's all in one workflow. It's not like you're doing kind of separate work in a different part of the workflow. It's all kind of one. It's like a river. Everything's sort of feeding into the same stream, and it's all going down to the same place.
And your thoughts on using LED, not necessarily for VP, and for using it for lighting? Talk to me about that, Simon.
What, as in the whole screen?
Yeah.
I have seen people do capture. So I know one short they were only capturing the face. So they were using a huge screen just for the lighting on the face, and then the rest of it was all motion capture of the body, because they were replacing the body in post in Unreal and stuff. So yeah, I think it's super helpful in terms of getting those correct colors and movement of light and shadow and everything else. I think it's you can see it in the Mandalorian, in the reflections and everything else. I think it's a lot more helpful than green, isn't it? Or having to deal with that.
Yeah. I think we're still away. It amazes me how fast the technology is moving. We're getting panels now, the LED panels that have got white chips as well, so you can get kind of clean full spectrum of light. I think that's really important, because you have to bear in mind with VP, it's basically sort of event like rock and roll LED screens that we've started to use for film work. And it's only now that it's kind of become an established thing that the technology is starting to be specifically built for VP. And that's where I think, and the same with the games engines as well, and a lot of the other technology, the camera tracking all comes from virtual camera stuff with kind of mocap. And so all the technology is converging. And now that we've sort of established VP as a regular part of the filmmaking process, we're starting to get bespoke tools that have been built for VP. And
these guys, Sony, they are
they're amazing panels.
The Sony Verona panels are game changing for virtual production.
Yeah.
And yeah, you're so right. It's like we're at the very, very tip of the iceberg in terms of what we can actually achieve with this technology moving forward, and it's exciting.
Yeah, and the way I think I described it to somebody recently is like the original tools that we had, like the stuff that was coming from events, was kind of like having a sledgehammer, and now we're like getting down to like a scalpel. Like that's what something like the Verona panels, exactly that is kind of. Like
it's the diodes, isn't it? They're getting closer and smaller together.
Which means you can be closer to the wall without having wire, which means also the light output is cleaner, more full spectrum, but also brighter, so you can do more with it, and you're then also closer to the panel. So there's just it opens up a lot of scope. It's getting to the point where I think we were playing with some Verona panels, and we were like almost getting lens flare just from the brightness of the panels because they're so bright, which is amazing. Because then you're starting to be like, okay, like one of the big things at the moment is you can't really do hard light directly from the wall, but we're getting to a point where those panels are going to be so bright that you can start to actually get like hard sunlight off the LED wall, which is a really different that sort of opens up
especially
a bunch of possibilities.
Filters or things like that, and you want that blooming, which you might get off a window. If you had a digital, obviously on the screen it's showing a window, and you want that blooming feel. Yeah. Unless you had you're not really going to get that. Obviously, if you had a light above the screen, because it's not doing the same thing. Whereas if that's bright enough and you're using some filters, you can get that blooming and that nice kind of look to it, can't you?
Yeah, and it's in some ways similar to like with using Unreal Engine the last few years. It started off like a video game thing, and to make stuff like lighting look realistic, you sort of had to hack your way around it and kind of work around it. And now increasingly they've got the lighting system in Unreal is getting, and the cameras as well, is getting more and more close to real world. So you don't have to like fake as much stuff. And it's similarly with the sort of in real life virtual production stuff with the way the panels are working. You just have to do less workarounds. You don't have to like, or at some point soon, you won't have to like punch out a hole in the LED and put a hard light through that. You won't have to like fake stuff if you want lens flares and blooming and veiling flare and that sort of thing. That it's just getting closer to reality, and therefore you don't have to hack so much stuff to kind of make it look good.
So we were speaking about this before. I think that I've been waiting for almost Unreal to kind of catch up to where I wanted it to be, for me to kind of get more involved in that sort of side of things. Because I remember 6 months ago I was like, if only they had the metrics and data in there to match. Like if I know what my 18K is doing or 10K or whatever, then I wish they had those metrics there, rather than, because before it was just I don't know, I'm just going to click this thing and it's going to be a broad light or a hard light, but I don't really know the metrics or what it's relating to in real life. And I'm like, but I know what real life things do, not CGI world.
Yeah, so
now you're saying they have that, right?
Exactly, yeah. So like in video game world, if you're lighting a video game level, you just want a slider that goes from like 0 to 100 for each light. And with in the real world, like we sort of work in like lumens or lux or exposure values or whatever, and they've started to add all of that into Unreal now. Amir?
Like that.
Right. Cool. So in Unreal now they've like added it's much more photometric, so you can set up Unreal Engine, and I'm like writing a course at the moment for Final Pixel Academy for sort of Unreal Engine for DOPs, and the first step in that is to kind of set up Unreal Engine so that it works with like what I'm calling like photometric lighting. So basically the lights work like they do in the real world.
Yeah.
So you're not in like video game world where everything's sort of 0 to 100. Sometimes like the sun is like 150,000 because that is the brightness of the sun in the real world.
Yeah.
But that means that you can you can kind of look up a 600 watt LED light is whatever, I can't remember, 8,500 lux or something in the real world, or lumens, and you can create a light in Unreal that is that brightness, put it a certain distance away from the thing you're lighting, and it will basically look like it does in the real world. So you can start to use it for lighting viz, which is like we've not been able to do that before. Certainly not in Unreal.
Are you taking the overall light values, or is it often on charts they'll say, at 1 meter is this reading, at 5 meters is this, or you just
you can convert those numbers to. Okay. So I think it's I forget which way around it is now, but it's either lumen or lux. One of them is the at a certain distance, and one of them is like a universal number.
So that's the universal's one.
So you can convert one to the other, and then that's what you put into. I think lux is like at 3 meters.
There's a little bit of work still to get to work out what it is in the virtual, but it's still a lot easier than it was.
Yeah, and what's nice is once I've created my little package of lights that I might use regularly, then I can just kind of reuse them, or you just have a little note of like, this is the settings for these lights. And yeah, so that's really useful. And
well, for previs and prep, and I mean, I'd love to. That's why I was kind of waiting for those sort of features to come out a little bit more, so then I can prep a project, you know, and I know, I need these lights along this street, whereas rather than kind of just putting it all in trucks and kind of hoping it's going to work on the day.
And the amazing thing is like bounce light and negative fill work. So like I've been doing these little recreating shots from movies in Unreal Engine recently. So I did it was like a shot from Blade Runner, and it was all just too flat on the camera side. So I just put up a big black cube basically behind camera, exactly what you do on a film set, and it just does exactly what you're expecting it to do. You can put a white card up to somebody's face in Unreal Engine, and you get the bounce light just how you'd expect. So it's great for DPs because you just don't have to. It's always felt with 3D software like you have to have this like mysterious like mystical knowledge of 3D software and be a 3D VFX artist to be able to work in that world. But I think increasingly, and especially with Unreal, because it's real time and you don't have to like wait for the results, you just light like you light in the real world, which is like really good because we're good at that. That's what we do.
Yeah, and it
we
makes
don't
it
have
more
to learn
accessible.
new skills. We just have to learn like
other than the program.
Yeah, but creatively, I guess
I haven't touched the program
exactly,
and just so you're aware, I don't have a clue about it, but. You know, I'll employ someone, and then and then as long as I know the tech is there, then we can obviously make some plans. You know,
exactly, and figuring out where the buttons are and stuff in Unreal is fairly straightforward. It's the creative side that's difficult, and if you've got to fake everything and understand like baking light and light masses and shadow maps and all this stuff that you kind of even a year ago you had to know in Unreal, which I was like, I did like the optimization course on Final Fix Academy, and I was like, never going to remember this. This is like 15 steps to get the lighting looking real, and I was like, I don't think I'm ever going to remember this. And now it pretty much just works the way that we work on set. So it's
this is a really great perspective, because quite often I get cinematographers in the training who will come up and ask me, do I have to learn all this stuff in Unreal? Like this is a whole new set of skills on top of my expertise that I already know. And how much Unreal would you need to know to be able to work effectively in virtual production?
Don't necessarily think you need to know any Unreal to work effectively in virtual production, but for me, I like, it's about having as much control over the lighting of the virtual world as possible. So that's why I dived into Unreal. But that's kind of like I have a reasonable amount of background in that. So I think if you've never used a 3D software before, I can understand if you would just want to be able to have the language and the knowledge to be able to talk to the bad artists, for example. But like I say, because it's so increasingly in real world terms, you can just say to a VAD artist, I want an 8-foot by 8-foot soft light over there, and they can build that in Unreal, because like that's how Unreal works. Like
this helps to take away all of the onset lighting and pre-lighting in terms of figuring out what you want. You can do it now all in previs, which is going to save time, save money.
Yeah, you can do a certain amount of that. Yeah, exactly. You can do a certain amount of that in previs, exactly. And like I say, when I'm doing VP projects, I like to light the virtual environment basically with the same lights that I would use in the real world, because I think it syncs up better then. If you're using like if you're sort of faking lights that are sort of video game type way of lighting, then I don't think it matches I don't think it matches as well with the real world stuff in front of the screen. So I tend to like, as much in Unreal you can have lights that are like hidden, so you can have a light that's kind of magically casting light somewhere. I tend to light from like outside of the camera view, like from above and through windows and all that sort of stuff, like you would in the real world, because and using practicals, because then it just all feels much more real. So that tends to be my approach to it. But in terms of choosing projects and whether you shoot VP or not, I think that vehicle work is like where I would say I'm always like,
it's definitely pushing. A lot more people are doing it for that reason, aren't they?
Yeah.
Or space stuff.
Yeah, space stuff. Yeah,
space
totally.
Stuff,
yeah,
you know.
but anything where you like in a vehicle, spaceship, car, motorbike, it's like it's a really good case. Like it's a really, there's a lot of reasons to do VP, mostly because low loaders suck.
Yeah,
which I say all the time.
Gravity is like a good example. Like it wasn't around then, was it, when they did the film Gravity? And then now they used a very similar sort of thing on the Creator, where on the fields and space in the background, and just shows how I didn't know when I watched the film that it was virtual production. Like that's the way they did it. I mean, I know they probably rotoscope bits and stuff, but it just shows how much it's come along.
Yeah, you've got lots of reflective surfaces from a DP's point of view. That's going to like make green screen very difficult for the VFX guys, but also from a lighting perspective, quite tricky. And then
Shots at dusk, or if you need that.
Yeah, if you need all day, all day magic hour is a big one. All day magic hour, or even locations where it's like almost impossible to light for night. So like deserts and stuff like that, big open landscapes where you can't. You'd end up doing day for night, which often doesn't look brilliant.
I mean, I've done it where just in a studio we just blacked it out, and obviously we just left it clean above their heads, but it was just black. So then obviously in post you could just comp in, a sky. We obviously dressed the floor as desert, and with all the tents and everything else, and then above them in the top third was just darkness. So I guess it's a similar method. You just obviously with this you'd get the lumens and everything off the screen, wouldn't you?
Yeah, and
you get that natural
deep
moonlight.
background. You can see, you can have sort of moonlight lighting up as desert all the way to the horizon, which is nice.
We know the use cases when we would and when we wouldn't use it, but when is it like this is a no-brainer for me? Where I'm going to need to use this technology?
Definitely, like for me, if there's any. If there's a lot of vehicle work, I'd always like push for doing stuff on some sort of LED wall or whatever, because
10 car interiors, and you can't get 10 cars in one day, or 5 or whatever. That's 5 low load is that's a lot of work. Do you know what I mean? For a lot of conversations, and you either scrap them, or you just got to. You just get the cars in the studio and just smash them out.
Yeah,
and even like the Red Bull, where you had an embargoed car, situations like that as well.
Yeah, and like you're saying, if you're doing a long form narrative project and you've got a bunch of car scenes with different vehicles, different locations, you can do all those interiors in a day, and then rely on second unit for the up and pass and drone shots and all that sort of stuff, which is great. And the other thing for me, like low loaders as well. And low loaders is just for actors and director, it's just not ideal because they're like directing over a walkie-talkie.
You can't hear things. It's all too loud.
It's freezing cold for everyone. You're down to like a skinny crew because you've all got to fit on the low loader. Like I love Vickers. Like, don't get me wrong, Vickers Action, amazing company, great low loaders, great kit,
great car rollers as well.
Yeah, they do. They do. But like, I just think, I think for like narrative dialogue scenes, VP is so good for car stuff.
Yeah,
it's so quick. It's all about the quality of the plates at that point, I think, because you're generally for like terrestrial rather than space-based like car stuff, you're probably dealing with plates, and then it just comes down to having, if you've got good quality plates. And then you can really light to it, because I think on TV you can always tell when it's green screen, right?
Well, I can tell when it's VP.
Yeah,
because it's something about the motion of the car is not quite, or the speed's not right, or something like that. But I saw it done really well recently on a show, and they obviously took the plates themselves, and where they did, the up and passes of the real car, they did the plates along the same road. So it was the same background, the same lighting. So it was all consistent. And if you're consistent and get your plates from the same place, where then everything's going to match.
Yeah.
Whereas if it's just some random stock footage, it's not going to work well with.
And it's all those other little things. And this is what I think from DP's point of view, VP is all about, like adding the little sprinkles of stuff on top. So for instance, like with car stuff, a little bit of movement of the vehicle is really important. A little bit, if they've got their window down, get a fan in there, get some airflow in there. If it's or have it so that it's like a bit of rain, blow some water at the windscreen, just all that stuff like that. So you're sort of, I call it like visual uncertainty. So you're just layering up things between the lens and the LED wall to feel like there's a real world going on. Because if you just have like camera, person, wall, it always feels like you're sort of presenting the weather. And the more things you can layer up in that depth, the better it will look. So
we did. Our team worked on the car plates or the car process for Criminal Record, the Apple TV series. And the way that was done, so the camera was on like a bungee, and then it kind of closed off because of the car wash was around it. And then so they had the movement of the bungee, and then the car was given movement as well. And then the director was had the car plate footage that the director had chosen. There was this one bit where I think it was Peter Capaldi had to like put his foot on the brake and like, you know, make a stutter. And the director had chosen a piece of the plate footage that had like something coming out to the side. So there was a reaction from the cast.
Right.
And, you know, you could just be, you've got more control over that situation to be able to make those creative decisions, which I think is super.
Exactly. And like I think like Masters of the Air was a good example. I've seen lots of behind the scenes come out from that, and obviously Danny, who you had on the podcast, did some work on that, and that was with that they could react to what was going on around them. If a plane's going down next to them, they can see that and react to it. Which like with green screen, I mean, I've been on shoots where you've got like something on a stick.
Yeah.
And they're just like walking along with it beside for eyeline or whatever, but it's not the same as being able to actually emotionally react to being in the situation. And I think, for vehicle stuff, that's a big part of it.
But there's a tendency that people go with, oh, well, let's have it on a really smooth, you know, gimbal or arm or whatever, and then the camera's just being pushed sort of gently, if at all. And they're kind of doing, you know, really fancy, because, you know, I think the automatic thing is we can do really fancy moves here. But then for me, whenever I watch it, I can tell straight away they're not on a low loader and it doesn't feel as real.
Yeah.
Whereas, it's like you said, if you've got the car properly vibrating as though it would be on the road, as it would be, micro vibrations, and then the camera would also have micro vibrations, that feels more real.
That's the way. That's the way I think about with vehicle stuff.
You start going through glass, and they so often do now. It kind of takes you out of it. It makes it feel less.
I mean, obviously, it depends on creatively what your intent is, but my preference with vehicle stuff is that you have very smooth plates because the world is smooth. The world is not moving. The world is not vibrating. So you have very smooth plates, and then you're either moving the camera and the car independent to each other, but by a reasonable degree.
Yeah.
Or you actually just still hard mount like you would if you're on a low loader. You just hard mount the camera to the car, or have them both on the same thing that's then moving.
And also our world builders have now developed car plates in Unreal. So for the Dancing with the Stars Disney Hyundai spot that we did earlier on in the year, we did the world builders team did the downtown LA artwork, the VAD for it, that essentially Tinkerbell goes past and then turns it all into glitter. And we got the vibe of that. We enjoyed doing that, and so the team started playing around with that and seeing what we could achieve, and how we could make it, how efficient it could be to actually just create it from scratch.
Yeah.
And actually, cost-wise, it's cheaper to do it that way than to go and buy. Obviously, timelines and stuff like that, it depends what your schedule's like, but
you can be more custom on what backgrounds you want, and speeds,
and therefore what era you're in,
and night and day, and
so that's fun.
So from an education standpoint, DPs, cinematographers who are training up to be DPs, obviously education is changing a lot. Like new media programs are starting to install walls in schools. They're starting to teach them virtual production so that they become job ready by the time they graduate. What would you say would be some key tools or some key things besides the general new workflow for ICVX, but what would be some really good tips for cinematographers that are coming into the industry? Someone who hasn't used Unreal and someone who uses Unreal quite a lot. It's quite a big spectrum. But would you say would benefit them if they want to work in virtual production, that they would need to skill up or learn?
I think if you're shooting on the screens, it's completely different from sitting at a computer and working with Unreal, isn't it? Really, because you're prepping it and you understand it more, and that's what's going to be on the screen. But you're still filming in front of the screen, still just filming.
Practical,
it's just it's the same job, but it's for me when I've been doing it, it's more about get the right plates. If you're going to buy plates, make sure that it's exactly what the kind of lighting you want, and that you can mimic it and match it on set. If you can't match it, it's going to be a nightmare because you're trying to sell something you can't sell.
Right.
And we're always trying to sell to real life, or to the story. And whereas obviously if you're using Unreal on the screens, then it's limitless. It's a lot more controlled. It's a lot easier to deal with. Obviously, like planning wise, if you understand Unreal and you can prep and everything else, it helps. But
I'd add to that, like the because obviously you've worked in Unreal, you haven't, but the ultimately the way we do it anyway is make sure that the DOP feels fully supported in the pipeline. So we bring the DOP in at the previous TechVig stage. We do and also in the like very preliminary early discussions about the environments, because it makes sense to us if we build an environment that is going to make an easier, smoother ride for the DOP to light it and to make decisions that can inform on how we make it work for the schedule and for the budget as well. Because if we build an environment which is going to require a lighting list this long, then the budget's going to die. Like I really took that lighting list out on my microphone then. Sorry, microphone. Anyway, sorry. So it, like having the DOP in conversations with us through our VAD build, having our virtual pre-light early on, so that the DOP, even if they haven't worked with Unreal before, can start thinking about what their package is going to be like when they, all of the decision making becomes more fluid and becomes more, I'd like to say, enjoyable, guys. And really, if you haven't done VP before, if you as a DOP, it's just about making yourself feel comfortable with this new approach of working and potentially what the red flags may be, and not be scared of the technology. And that's why we open arms and give big cuddles to our DOPs.
It's a lot easier working with Unreal and virtual world is on the screen, isn't it, than just plates, because you have control. I mean, that's the idea, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you're like a young filmmaker or DOP coming up now, I would use Unreal Engine as a way to practice storytelling, visual storytelling, because getting a whole crew together and actors and locations and cameras and lights and all that stuff is expensive, and you only get to do it so many times. Even at the level, but even at the level we're at, like, how many days a year do we really actually spend on set, like doing stuff? Like, so much of stuff is you're
unless
prepping,
you're going to do a short every weekend,
exactly,
which it's going to cost someone something.
Even if you are doing a short every weekend, you can also be like in evenings during the week playing around in Unreal Engine, and like that's
prepping
one of the
for the weekend.
That's one, exactly, and that's one of the things that I really try and do as much as possible in Unreal is just practice storytelling, because you don't need to worry about all the tech. It doesn't need to look good at first. You don't even need to worry about the lighting. Just go in and start like figuring out what works to tell stories, like how
and what you like as well.
How you use, because you've got all the tools there. You've got camera movement, you've got lenses, you've got lighting, you've got set dressing, you've got sort of all the elements of filmmaking are there represented in some way or other. So you can just play around with them, and whether it's like just basic like little cube, or whether it's like a real table on a set, it's sort of providing the same function.
You can block it out, work out whether something works in that.
And you can just iterate really quickly. I think that's the thing that is quite a hard thing to do in filmmaking. Is it takes, if I do a short film, I maybe first get sent the script 6 months before we shoot it, and then you do a few weeks prep on and off with the director, and then you shoot it for a couple of days, and then you do a couple of days in post on the grade. But with Unreal, you can just constantly be trying things out and going back. I just sometimes open up old projects and see like, oh, how did I like this? How did I do this like 6 months ago? And like, how would I do it now? Like, how differently would I do things? So, and like I say, it's getting closer and closer in those game engines to how we do things in the real world. So you're sort of learning the same skills, and you can just use that as a way of practicing. But I think that the only downside, I think, when it's very technological things, is people get very caught up in the technology. And my feeling is you should like just think about the storytelling, because ultimately on set, that's the thing that matters. Like when you can see films that are like very basic in the production values, but if they've got really good storytelling, it overcomes that. But if you've got a really pretty looking film where the storytelling's not very good, it doesn't really matter that it looks nice.
You've got to also remember of when people are looking at doing Unreal and things like that, and you can create these whole environments in your house, through your laptop and stuff. It's amazing, but then also filmmaking's always been about collaboration, And obviously, especially with you guys, doing so far in advance before a shoot, collaborating, between myself, the gaffer, and you, and and the previs and everything else, it all comes together. But I think for me, it's collaboration between the production designer and the gaffer and the director and all these other people, which you can't sometimes do, obviously, just in Unreal and stuff, unless obviously they're in on it as well.
Absolutely, but, yeah. It feels like, for me, it's like a good way of sort of sharpening your tools between jobs or in downtime and stuff like that. Yeah, that's true. That's the whole. Yeah, that's and if anything, that's probably more important than anything else in filmmaking, is like communication.
That's what I was gonna say. It's this ICVX workflow in terms of everybody collaborating together, and there's also this new vernacular and language that everybody's starting to use. So understanding the technology for the purposes of being able to communicate with your team is really important, not necessarily that you know how to use it.
And that's probably, I think that's one of the things I like the most about shooting on VP, really, is that you, like we were saying earlier, you're much more connected to the VFX department and much more integrated with them, rather than you just kind of, sometimes it feels a bit like data collection, especially when you're like fully green screen stuff. You just feel like, I'm just collecting a bucket of pixels that's going to go to somebody else, and they're really making the thing. Whereas with VP, you feel a lot more kind of, it's sort of all sort of in the same orbit.
You're collaborating more at the same time, rather than entrusting people afterwards who might or might not do a good job, depending on budget, etc.
Do you think that camera tracking will come into your department?
Is it not now?
Don't know, is it?
Yeah.
I want to scratch that. I want to scratch it. Well, usually we look after it.
I think it's maybe a controversial opinion for this podcast, but I think a lot of the technological stuff is going to become just completely commoditized.
Yeah.
Because it just isn't. It's becoming so well worked out. All
things
of
are
the
going to get smaller as well. Like they're quite big and bulky. Like I know I used the first sort of systems, and they're all quite big and bulky. And I tried putting certain systems on a Steadicam and remote heads, and they just kind of went to a certain angle and went, because it was too heavy. But now they're getting smaller and lighter, and version 5 or whatever's coming out, and they are getting better, aren't they?
Yeah, because there's definitely a lot of the roles at the moment which for arguably could sit in different departments, because I think that with virtual production, obviously there's it's across all of the departments. Every single department on a call sheet is being touched in some way by virtual production, and hopefully they're not having to call HR about it.
So smart.
Fucking hell.
It took me a minute. I didn't even get that shit.
You're not speaking close enough to the mic.
Okay, that's good, because we're not going to use that bit anyway.
I don't know what you're doing.
Yeah, I know. I didn't.
What are you doing?
I know, it looks very rude. I'm going to call HR. Yes, because I think that a lot of virtual production is, it's crossing over multi departments. It's across all of the call sheet. It's relevant to the decision making of lots of different flows of creativity, and it'll be interesting to see how the roles evolve, like camera tracking being led more by the camera department, and having the DOP, having the HODs in general, the production designers involved in the decision making earlier on than arguably they are already. We try and make it as early as we can. And I think and this, like, again, when we were talking earlier about, like, you choose to do it in Unreal, it's people's preference, it's personal preferences and style, I think, that makes decision on doing it that way. And I think that it would be interesting to see how that evolves as well. Like, will people start specializing, or will it's, I don't know, it's interesting.
That's a good way to kind of wrap up the end in terms of what you think, knowing where we are today with AI, generative AI, lots of things coming into the space. Where do you think the state of the industry will be? I mean, we've always said that virtual production will be just called production at some point.
Yeah.
But through your lens, where do you think VP will go in terms of your integration into?
I think it's just going to get a lot easier. I think a lot of the things right now that are sort of the first things on the list that you say, oh, you can't do this with virtual production, or oh, that's quite tricky with virtual production. I just think a lot of those things will either become things that everybody knows you don't do with virtual production, that you don't attempt, or things that are just solved by the technology. So like, for instance, like right now, people always say, oh, you've got to be like 2.5 meters away from the screen because it's like, because of the pixel pitch.
Right.
Well, the new Verona, they called Verona? Yeah, the new Verona screens are like 1.6, so you can be half as close. And similarly with like the brightness again.
And they have the coding that's over the.
Yeah. So
you can get bigger walls.
lots of things. So
things
yeah.
like that,
and again, like
color rendition,
and the sort of, do we do green screen, do we do virtual production? Like, as more content is being created, as I've said several times before, like once you've created a 3D scene in Unreal Engine or whatever you're creating it doesn't go anywhere. It's not like a real set where you have to break it down and put it in a storage. Like, it's just a file that you can load on any time. So there's going to be massive libraries of sets that are like virtual sets that have been built that can be deployed.
And people will start realizing that you don't necessarily need to use a massive volume to be able to do virtual production. And actually, you can use a smaller LED window and achieve really beautiful,
especially for
output.
pickups. Like if you've got like if you think about,
exactly,
I've done quite a few films, and the amount of times we're like, oh, we never got that shot where it was an overhead shot of someone pouring a cup of tea, and you can just. Okay, you don't need a VP for that, but I'm just saying, like, you need like a little insert shot of someone's badge with like a hallway in the background to see, because you never picked up what their name was.
Totally, happens all the time in TV shows where you're like, that is a really weird green screen like shot that they've inserted into that scene because they changed a bit of script and wanted to pick it up. And with and that stuff can be expensive, but also often doesn't look that great when it's been shot like quickly on a bit of green screen in the corner of the studio. And I think a lot of studios are just going to have a little volume in one of their stages, and you can just jump on and shoot some stuff as long as you've shot the odd plate here and there, or you've got if you've got a general. I just don't think it's going to be long before like all the places that you really want to shoot, like Fifth Avenue, I don't know, Piccadilly Circus. There's just going to be like virtual versions of those environments. In the same way you've got driving plates, I think there's just going to kind of be that stuff available. That you can say, oh, we want to be in the middle of the Atlantic, and you just pull up that scene in Unreal. So I think a lot of that stuff's going to get easier. I think most crews are going to be like used to VP, have some experience. So
it's the same with post. Like you were talking about collaboration. Roles now compared to 10, 15, 20 years ago, everyone was just like, I am this, I am that. But now it's kind of like all the posts are having to learn about cinematography and lighting, and to get it, to get the environments right or roughly right before the DP gets involved. And the DP's now having to learn about post, and I think everyone's really having to cross over.
And it's not totally brand new stuff as well. I've been around long enough. I kind of remember when digital comp was first coming around, and suddenly you had a lot more green screen being used. And at first, lighting departments were very, not wary, but like concerned to make sure they were lighting green screens correctly and everything was exactly as it needed to be, and going around with a light meter, checking every 1 meter gap on the thing to make sure everything's level and all the rest. And now, like, largely that's just easy. But largely it's just kind of like everybody knows like this works on green screen. This is how you light a green screen. That works, so we'll just do that every time. And I think it'd just be the same with VP, that in a few years everybody will be like comfortable to get to a base level. And what's cool then is that then all the kind of creative capital is put towards the storytelling and how you use it in interesting ways. And I had to say I don't think I've seen the rate of innovation of the form that I was expecting with VP. I feel like Mandalorian did a lot, and then I feel like we're starting to move away from the like very volume based into like build your own wall kind of era of VP, which I think is going to be quite interesting to see where that goes, because I think there's a lot of use cases that haven't been explored yet for that kind of custom.
If you did it as sets, like you build your flats, and if we instead of flats we had LED walls, and then your dressing is you treat it more like that, I think that would be more helpful. What annoys me is you've just got a flat wall and it feels like I'm just always shooting at a stage. But then I guess it's
a bit theatrical, isn't it? It still feels like
flat,
a little bit rock and roll world based, where you're sort of like at the back is a big LED screen, and actually there's going to be a bunch of more interesting.
That's why the more bigger curved ones can help, because then you can do over the shoulders. Otherwise, you're constantly just flipping everyone round. But if it gets to the point where they're more semicircular, or they're like I said, flats. You've got those parts of like your jigsaw and your set.
Yeah.
then I think you can utilize it almost in a better way. But
Yeah.
hopefully it gets to that.
Earlier on, Ben told me a story about how he watched a film and he was in a slightly different position for 3 hours,
Oh.
and it gave him neck crack.
Yes.
And I feel like I'm
Getting old.
experiencing
Are you getting that now?
that
from
right
turning
now.
sideways? Yes.
So I'm gonna wrap us up. But thank you
That was
so
amazing.
much for
So much
joining
good
us.
information.
Oh, I'd like to just say, since I last worked with you guys on a virtual stage and virtual production, every single show I now watch, I'm like, oh, that's definitely a virtual screen. And then I find out that the cinematographers contact them and they go, no, it wasn't. I'm like, I'm going insane. I'm going insane.
Well, I suppose if you can't tell, then it's done really, really well.
Yeah.
But I think it was done like so
that's
something's
it.
off.
Yeah, I know.
Something's off in my head.
I know.
I don't know what it is.
I think with vehicle stuff you can always tell it's green screen because there's always a slightly soft mat around the hair. The one, no offense to people who worked on the morning show, but the morning show, because of Jennifer Aniston's bangs, you can just it's
Outside the
always
offices.
obvious because there's always just softness
Right, yeah.
in the mat in the key around her hair.
It was that show that I was thinking of when they were outside. But then they do a big wide, and I'm like, oh, it is that location. So
Oh
maybe,
yeah, no, I think it's vehicle stuff with that show where
Yeah,
it's
no,
definitely
exactly.
green screen.
But it has
And it's-
driven me mad.
But it's
now.
really
I'm
hard
constantly-
to do nighttime vehicle stuff in a car because all the reflections in the windows and you've got low light levels, so you get a lot of green spill. It's really tough. Whereas you'd even do it with a projector. You don't even need an LED wall, but it's much better with LED wall, and it just works every time. And that's the sort of place where I feel like that's your entry level. Like
Yeah,
you'll
low-hanging
go
fruit.
down a
Nighttime.
rabbit hole from there as
Yeah.
a DP.
Yeah.
But like just start shooting your car stuff on LED walls, and you'll see like what
Especially
you
at
can do
night,
and kind
it's
of go
a
from
lot
there.
easier, like you said. Yeah.
Good tip.
Yay. Thank
Thank
you.
you.